We'll be done by then. Yeah, that's right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to begin by welcoming those members of the public or press who have joined us today, either in person or watching via the live stream, to this meeting of the Community's Social Mobility and Inclusion Committee at New Shire Hall in Alconbury Weald. The County Council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so feel free to take pictures, tweet or blog during the meeting, but could I please request that members of the committee and the public turn their mobile phones to silent or vibrate whilst the meeting is taking place. There is no fire alarm test scheduled for today, so if the alarm sounds, please leave by the nearest marked fire exit and assemble in the car park. So item 1 is notification of chair and vice chair.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to start the meeting today by noting that at the full council meeting on 16th of May 2023, Councillor Sanderson was reappointed as the Chair of the Community, Social Mobility and Inclusion Committee and Councillor Boulat as the Vice Chair for the 2023-24 municipal year. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Item 2 is apologies for absence and declarations of interest. Nick.
Thank you again. We've had apologies from Councillor Criswell and Councillor Goldsack substituting, and Councillor Billington and Councillor Gardiner substituting for him.
Thank you. Any other apologies to report? No. And any declarations of interest from any members? I don't see any, so we'll move on. Item 3 is the minutes of our meeting held on the 23rd of March. We're asked to approve those as a true and correct record. Does anybody have any objections to that at all? No, I'll take those as approved. Thank you. Item 4, public questions and petitions. We've not received any of those for this meeting, so I'll go straight to item 5, which is the Cambridgeshire Skills Accountability Agreement. And we'll hear a presentation from Tom Malloy. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you, Chair. So first of all, I'll just start by a very brief explanation. What is an accountability statement? An accountability statement is a new requirement on providers who receive public funds from the DfE through the Education and Skills Funding Agency. So any provider who receives over £1 million of funding needs to produce an accountability statement. And the timing for this is actually really good. With all the change that's taken place within Cambridge Skills and bringing it back into the council, it gives us a chance to look at what we do and link that closely to the wider objectives of the council. So the accountability statement is a brief document which is used by Ofsted and the funders to show that what we're doing has intent behind it. So it looks at finding that golden thread. So what are corporate and local objectives and need? Interestingly, 2 providers in the region, Milton Keynes and Luton councils, have been inspected by Ofsted in the last 3 weeks, and it was the first thing that the Ofsted inspectors asked to see was their accountability agreement. So the accountability agreement is a brief thing. It shows our intent, why we're going to do things. So that links it to, national and local things, but most importantly, it links it to the new strategic framework. So what we can do is link it back and show that what we're doing, is following, the needs of the council. It also shows how we do things. So a little bit of our implementation. So it outlines the sources of information that we get our data and so forth to plan and how we plan. And it also gives a brief overview of some of our KPIs. It's not root and branch, it's not everything, but it gives people a flavour of what we're about to do. And what this enables us to do is, again, link things back to various different plans and objectives. One thing we also had to do within the accountability agreement was come up with a vision and a statement of purpose. So we've got a new vision, which is not new in terms, but a new statement for that. And that is providing learning that empowers Cambridge's residents and communities to fill their potential. So again, linking it back to everything that we do. It also enables us to give our tutors and our curriculum managers a clear framework for when they're going to plan a course. So basically that whenever a course is planned, they have to be able to show it links back to this. And actually, when we're auditing and doing standardizations, we can pull it back through these things and ensure that everything links back. And then what that enables us to do Because if we're complying with our funding, we're providing Ofsted what we do, but it also gives us and the public and yourselves a clear understanding of what we're doing and some ways of measuring that to see that we're achieving our outcomes. So what we're asking today is that you agree the vision and the statement of purpose, and also the KPIs that have been included. And once that's been done, if everything is agreed, or once amendments have been made, we'll send it to the designers to make it look a bit more corporate. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Tom. Do we have any questions at all from anyone? We'll have Claire and then Philippa. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation and the explanation. I've got two questions. One is, and I'm looking at 1.6 in the report, you said it's to be reviewed and updated annually. Do you have any concerns about increased bureaucracy and increased time that it will take to review it and update it annually? That's one thing. And the second thing, second question relates to the second half of that sentence, and will have no direct bearing on funding allocations, which seems to me to be rather strange, because I thought that the point about the accountability agreement was that because you receive funding of £1 million or over, you have to have an accountability agreement. So the two parts of that argument don't seem to fit together. So maybe you could just elucidate that. Thanks.
If I start on the second point first, what my understanding, because that's taken directly from the guidance that the DfE provided about the accountability statement. So it is a condition of funding that we have an accountability agreement, but surprisingly, and like you, there has been questions asked, they're not going to remove funding because what's in the accountability agreement. I think this, this is a new requirement, we'll see this evolve. But at the moment, we're following the guidance, and that's the wording within the guidance. But what it does do, as I said, it provides the inspectors and the funders kind of a framework and an overview of what we're looking to do. So when there's the other things like an Ofsted inspection or a funding audit, they can link it back to those. And in regards to the first point about additional bureaucracy, actually, this is replacing some of the things that we had to do. So actually, this is a simpler version of, we had to do business operation plans, and we still do things like that. But again, this isn't an addition, it's a replacement of some of the additional things we did previously.
Thank you very much, Philippa.
Yes, first of all, just a few of the items about legibility, Tom. If people are coming into this online, sometimes they come from the back to the front. Where we've got strategic objectives, could we actually point out that this is strategic for the county as a whole? Because if somebody's looking at something to do with adult learning, they may query whether number one is about net zero carbon emissions, though of course it is for the top for the county. So maybe strategic ambitions of the county council. We'll just explain it a bit more. On page 3 and 4, we have, I'm sure you're trying to make it look more interesting and attractive, but those diagrams really don't help from the point of view of legibility. Both the color contrast and the font size makes them virtually illegible for some people in some places, and that's really important, I think. So if we could have an alternative just list with black on white type writing as well. I cannot read those just from here, and even if I blow it up, I still can't read some of that contrast, and I know other people will not be able to at all. So I think we need to be aware of that sort of legibility stuff. Sorry to be picky, but the other thing is more to do with what's actually the meat of this. In terms of access to broadband, I've got it down as page 6. We obviously have a big thing with digital exclusion and inclusion, and the two need to go together because digital facility can help us be included much more than before they invented it. But the barriers to access to broadband may well be financial. We need to make sure we've got the links there to recommendations about how to get the cheaper tariffs, much in the news at the moment, as you know. Access to a device. and then access to a safe space for learning. And that's where, oh yes, I've got it. Travel across the county needs to be safe, more environmentally sustainable. And we know we're trying to get plenty of people accessing online and then from their hubs. But can we add in, just in the work that we're trying to do, how we're bearing in mind that it may be finding other safe spaces, and they could be pubs, they could be schools, just to spread our net. And so in the increase the direct delivery, you've said 30% of the provision available remotely. I think how we spend that 10,000 needs to be quite inventive sometimes. And a quick plug for my colleagues. If I said BIPC, do you know what it stands for? Because it's brilliant stuff. Look it up.
Yeah, but thank you for that. In regards to the accessibility of the document, I said this is what we've done in-house. It hasn't been to the designers to make it accessible. So again, once that's all been agreed, that will happen, and all of those points will be covered. And in terms of the online, I think again that what I'm just thinking aloud here, but it's linking it back to some other things that we've got, again, hardship funds where people can access devices, and also links with the partnership work that we've got with libraries, where we're taking a lot more provision into libraries regarding safe spaces as a starter.
Thank you, Tom. We've got Ros and then Alex.
Yes, so let's talk about that we could develop other KPIs, and I have other questions about Cambridgeshire Skills. Yes, that would be great if we could have a workshop where we could submit questions and look at KPIs and whatever at some point.
Happy to facilitate that.
I think that would be a great idea. Yeah, thank you. Alex, you're next.
Thank you. Just wanted to one comment and one question about the KPIs as well. I'm really pleased to see the focus on facilitating a transition to paid employment, like especially in the ESOL, and the work that's mentioned with the Traveller Health team to provide vocational training. I think that's really, really welcome to link courses such as English courses or work with the Traveller team around the focus, the pathway into paid employment. So I think that's really positive. I was really pleased to see that. As a general question, looking at the different KPIs, and I think it's really good to have everything put in one table. I thought it would be useful to perhaps maybe for the next ones have it and how it have a comparison and how it compares with the current enrollments. I think it would be helpful for all members because, for example, I was looking at some of those figures and I thought I'm not really sure what we have at the moment or how much of an increase we're expecting. So, for example, the 500 ESOL places, how does it compare with the current ones, and how realistic? So we're able to assess how realistic it is for this to happen. So yeah, I was wondering if you can tell me a bit more about how are those calculated? Is it this like kind of like a kind of like a broad target, or are there like any, you'd use any kind of like formula to like calculate this in the different courses, and how does it compare like to the previous years?
Yes, so in terms of how does it compare to previous years, it's quite similar, and the reason for that is that we have we're externally funded, and the envelope of funding that we have received has not increased. So we're unable to sort of do significantly more. However, what has happened is the focus has shifted over the year. So again, over the last year, we are delivering a lot more ESOL than we were a couple of years ago, and that growth is continuing. So within it, part of the setting the targets is looking at how much funding we have available, and I think that's something that we could certainly cover in that workshop because it's quite complicated. Like each qualification has a different value, etc. So we haven't got unlimited scope to deliver more unless more money was found, but that's not forthcoming from the combined authority of the DfE at the moment. So it's planning within that funding envelope that we receive.
Thank you. I think that makes sense, and it would be particularly useful to know which areas we expect growth in, because you mentioned, for example, ESOL, where there's a growth in the population and a growth in provision in some areas, and which ones are similar to previous years. So actually this workshop and this comparison will be helpful to know what we are actually growing in as opposed to what we're keeping similar because of the funding constraints and framework. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have any comments at all or questions? No. Right. Thank you very much, Tom. So we're being asked and the recommendations to approve the accountability agreement, and secondly, to adopt the key performance indicators listed in the accountability agreement, in addition to those already in place. And I'd just like to thank you, Tom, for all you're doing on the skills board. That's been revitalized as well. We have a new more governing body, I think it's called now, isn't it? Which works very well.
Advisory board, but yes, thank you.
Very much. So there seems to be a consensus in support of the recommendations. Anybody disagree? No? Okay, so we're happy to take those as carried unanimously. Item 6 is the Cambridgeshire Priorities Capital Fund, and this will be presented by Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So we're bringing a report today on the Cambridgeshire Priorities Capital Fund, and there's 3 recommendations for committee to consider. The 3 recommendations to consider are around proposing the criteria, the eligibility and the 2-stage process for the applications, reserving an amount of 500,000 for resources within the County Council, and subject to recommendation A, also appointing a 7-member assessment panel. So just as a bit of background, back in April 2020, the Cambridgeshire Communities Capital Fund was set up, and that was originally a fund of £5 million. The original fund supported 35 community capital bids to receive funding, totaling just under £3.5 million. In July last year, members were asked to review incomplete projects from the old fund and to cease the old fund, and also to consider the remaining amount and propose a new capital fund for Cambridgeshire. And that's really what's led us here today. So the Cambridgeshire Priorities Capital Fund has been developed alongside partners and with member input. And today we are proposing a capital fund in total of £1.5 million. As I've already mentioned, the proposal is to reserve £500,000 of that for council resources, for example, for us to put capital spend onto libraries, child and family centres and family hubs. But the £1 million, which is what the focus really of today is about, is for community organisations to bid into. So the purpose of the fund is to support us to achieve our ambitions, and also to align with the ambitions of the Care Together programme. And they're all set out for you in the paper. The paper also recommends the process and the criteria for the fund. So we're recommending a 2-stage process. Stage 1, to reduce bureaucracy, is an expression of interest round, and bids that meet the criteria that we feel can then progress to stage 2 will be invited to complete full application. After round 2 closes, the process would involve a scoring, and that would include the member panel and officers from the council. This is a one-off fund, so once the money is spent, it's spent, and we anticipate all of this being completed by early 2024, with recommendations then coming back to COSMIC for approval for sign-off. I think that's the key points, Chair.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Any questions or comments? Quite a few hands. So we'll take Adela, Mark, and then Jeff.
Yeah, thanks. When the £5 million capital fund was set up, it was for organisations, communities and everything else. I'm just wondering, why are we allocating £500,000 to our own community assets? This should be paid for from our own budget and not from something that's come back that was originally intended for communities. Thanks.
Thank you for your question. So we considered this as an officer group and alongside members as well. And the rationale for reserving a proportion of the fund for council assets is because of the contribution that they make within communities. So it's recognising the importance that child and family centres, family hubs and libraries play in their communities, and the importance of us being able to allocate capital spend to them to support us to achieve our ambitions.
So why can't this money come out of our own budget?
The answer to that is the budgets are very tight, as we all know. Central government funding is drying up. So I think this is a way that we can help our own assets, which in turn help the community.
Okay. Then.
Thank you, Mark.
Well, I'll pick up on where that leaves off then, if I can. Will a spend on a county council community asset be assessed alongside potential spend on a private or community-based asset? And secondly, you say that officers and members have looked at that. Has this been debated in a committee before?
Can I just ask for clarification on which bit we're talking about debating in committee?
The fact that some of this money is being allocated to county council assets.
Thank you for that clarification. So in terms of the first part of your question about the assessment of county council assets, the proposal is to bring a future paper back on the $500,000 and the proposals to spend there. So it wouldn't be assessed alongside community bids. And the reason for that is because we are quite keen to launch the community fund so that we can give community organisations as long as possible to complete their bid process. And in terms of the debate around the proposal for the $500,000, this is the first time that this has come to committee. The previous papers have just been around the recommendation to propose new criteria and new spend against the fund.
Okay, so just as a supplementary question to that then, you said that two things there that jumped out to me. One was there's to give the community groups a speedier access to this funds, but I thought I heard you say that this won't be released until the autumn for answers next year. There are community groups out there waiting for this and have been waiting 18 months to 2 years now since the £1.5 million of the £5 million wasn't spent. So there's, I'd like an answer on that point. Yeah, I'll leave that one if I can.
So in relation,
with respect, I'm asking you as the officer. The members to your right are very different. It's you as an officer here that's asking for an officer position on the question that's being asked. I know you keep looking across to the officers.
Are you talking to me?
Well,
Mark or Lisa? I wasn't sure who you were talking to. Sorry.
I'm talking to the person that's presenting. Is it Lisa? I do apologise, Lisa. I've spoken to her.
That's
Okay.
fine. Sorry, I was just checking with Tom while I push my. I'm not looking for any support. Don't worry. So in response to the question around timescales, when we've consulted with people and when we've consulted with officers and members, the suggestion has been that people need adequate time to complete expressions of interest and proposals. In terms of this being a two-stage process, the expressions of interest, what we want to make sure is that we give people sufficient time to have parish council meetings, for example, and to return to us their thinking, and then adequate time as well to complete the proposal in full. So we would look to launch the fund over the next month. So as soon as we can possibly do that after committee, if it's approved. But because of the process then around applications and sign off at COSMIC, it would be early next year before all of the final sign off would be made under the proposal of the two-stage process.
I think just on the timing, Mark, it was only a few months ago that Girton Parish Council confirmed that they couldn't go ahead with the project. So the money was brought back into the budget, and Streatham, I think the parish poll was quite recent. And of course, just before then, we made the decision not to progress with that. So that's quite a recent development, which is why we're looking at the funding available at the moment. So I hope it'll be productive for everybody. Thank you, Mark. Jeff.
Yes, thank you very much. Forgive me,
only saw the papers for this last night because I was told I was on the committee. So if this is a question that is covered by the detail of the paper or has been covered previously, as I say, my apologies. Is it envisaged that these projects will be totally standalone? Will there be co-funding from either other community groups in partnership or from other councils or other public bodies? I say that with some feeling because I was a chair of a social or charitable organisation which got a very substantial grant from one of the lottery funders. And as we got it, every single other organisation that was co-funded, including the NHS, the local council, suddenly said, oh, we'll withdraw our funds now because you've got your money. So these are fairly small sums of money. And frankly, it'd be quite helpful to me to know what sort of projects you have in mind or have come up previously. But just on the co-funding issue, will it be permitted, and will there be something in the funding agreements to ensure that other public sector bodies don't withdraw once these projects are committed?
Thank you for your questions. Certainly in terms of our allocation of funding, we would not look to withdraw if other funding became available once we had awarded. We do encourage match funding in the applications. It's not essential, so standalone groups could put themselves forward. But we would certainly, if, for example, an asset was owned by a district council, we would be looking to achieve match funding there. In terms of the sorts of projects, just to bring it alive a little, I think we very much see this as projects within spaces. So, for example, there might be a building that you feel would be perfect to deliver some youth activity to support our children and young people to thrive in, but maybe it's dilapidated, needs renovating, or maybe there are spaces, public spaces, that require some accessibility adaptations. So they're the kind of things that we would be hoping to see come through the fund.
Just a small thought, £25,000 actually doesn't go that very far if you're renovating even a small community hall or church hall or whatever it is. It's construction costs are pretty steep these days, but I just make that observation. Obviously, the organisations who are putting in the applications will cost it out and make sure that the project is doable for the funds that they're looking for.
I think we're about to deal with that matter. Claire, did you want to update us?
And I should say that I have not discussed this with Councillor Seath. As you heard, Councillor Seath didn't know that he was a member of the committee until very recently. So I have thought about this since I received the papers, Chair. And I would really like to propose that we look at increasing this ceiling. As Councillor Seath has said, 25,000 doesn't go very far. And in my division, I've had two recent examples of that, especially with a huge increase in inflation in building costs of building materials. And if you're looking for matching funding, and I suspect that many organisations, whether parish councils or community organisations, I do accept that if that's the case, we'd possibly be giving fewer, having fewer projects. But then, of course, you know, not every project that comes forward will go to the ceiling. But those that really need it in order to make a big difference, in order to make the crucial difference, might be very glad of the increased sum. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Claire. Mark, did you want to come in here?
Occasion, I've just double checked, I can't see it. What's the ceiling on Cambridgeshire County Council owned projects such as libraries? Is it also 25,000?
So we haven't determined that yet. So that will feature in the paper that returns to Cosmic for future approval. So all we're asking for at the moment is the reserve of the £500,000 for county.
But is there do we know whether it's likely to be not greater than?
So we haven't done the detailed work on that yet, but at this stage, I wouldn't anticipate it being more than what we're proposing to community groups.
I would like to echo the comments of the two previous speakers. The project costs out there at this moment in time, and I totally applaud the match funding. I think that's absolutely right. There are access to lottery funds, there are access to other local authorities, there are access to other funding. But when I say that costs have gone through the roof, even for a roof replacement. You know, it's got pretty ridiculous out there. And I have to be honest with you, £25,000 in a community hall will probably just about cover the decorating. You know, I think I would rather see fewer projects done brilliantly than a number of projects touched.
I certainly see your point there, Mark. This cap was set, limit was set really in consultation with our Section 151 officer, Michael Hudson. I think there were concerns previously when it was the Communities Capital Fund with some of the spending, some of the governance arrangements around that. And it's felt that this is easier to manage if the project limits are much lower. Did you want to add to that, Lisa, at all?
I think just to echo that, so yes, we consulted with the 151 officer around what would be a suitable amount for the fund. It's not legislated, the 25,000. It's important for me to make committee aware of that. So if alternative proposals come forward today, then that's acceptable for those to be considered as well.
But yeah, just one follow back up there. Shouldn't it be not set at a capital fixed fund? Shouldn't it be effectively a measurement of the worth of the project on the people that it's reaching? You know, we can measure the capital value of an investment in youth, in senior citizens, etc., etc. Shouldn't that be our measurement, not an actual capital fund? Because I'll be honest with you, there may well be a project in St Neots, as far away in the county from me as it's possible to be, that's worth spending £300,000 on, you know. But if the capital return on that for that community is worthy, and you could focus on it from a Section 151 governance point of view, I just think we're coming about this from a numerical figure, which is wrong. I think it should be the capital value of the people involved in the project.
I'm happy to pick that up because I think certainly in terms of the value to the communities, and so the expectation of how any bid is going to meet the ambitions that are set out on our strategic framework is absolutely about demonstrating the commitment to communities. Part of the reason we specifically spoke with the 151 officer around setting an expectation around the thresholds, around the levels at which we would expect bids to come in, and it really is about setting some expectation around those thresholds, is partly because of the experience we'd had previously, where we'd had larger scale projects and we'd had risks that had been exposed and difficulties in projects not being able to be delivered. So it was trying to take advice from the 151 officer about a suitable set of expectations from a financial perspective, a lower and an upper expectation alongside the community benefit. But as Lisa just said, if there's a recommendation from this committee today, as is you know being discussed, to actually increase that threshold, then obviously that's absolutely why we're here discussing that with you today. And so we would happily take that feedback. It was about being cautious and about managing risk, and the size and scale of the projects being manageable by the community organisations, which is something we've seen has been problematic with some of the schemes that we supported previously. But yeah, I hope that helps.
Thank you. Alex and then Lucy.
Yeah, I think there are definitely like a lot of lessons from the previous fund that we need to reflect on. And I think it's like also, I mean, we can discuss about the amount, but it's also about the monitoring and I guess the governance of the organizations as well that come into play when we decide like what to offer. And I think I see both sides of the debate, because on the one hand, being in my not-for-profit sector job, having to apply for like very small grants, often in volunteer time, it's a very difficult decision to make, and it's actually very tricky to manage a range of small grants. And I'm someone who works in my own organization with philanthropic grants of like 10,000, and it's incredibly difficult to manage them and to match fund. But equally, I can see how actually having a high like kind of like a 300,000 or like a 200,000 type of grant, it's pretty much impossible for small community-based organizations to even consider applying, even if they have a great idea for a project that could bring social value, because they just won't have the governance structures in place and the proper like policies to manage that amount of money. So I think there's like, needs to be like a middle on this. And I have to say, I quite agree with Councillor Daunton's proposal. So I think we can move a bit further, but I think equally, I don't want to exclude some of the organizations organizations, especially the small community organizations who perhaps don't have all the kind of big charity governance structures in place to, I don't want to incentivize them from applying just because you say, well, you know, the grants can be very large. I want to say one point on the application process. I think what would be really, really helpful when we make this public is to have very clearly in the application process a list of what we can fund and what we can't fund, like many funders do and many local authority projects do. And I think it was very helpful to have this list in the report in 2.11.4, I think. Because we have to be mindful that for a lot of, if we want to encourage small organizations, community-based to apply, we need to be mindful that most people are making those applications in volunteer time. And actually, I quite agree with having the expression of interest, maybe having some guidance, some support, and having a very clear list of like, okay, those are the kind of things that we fund and we don't fund. So we actually make sure we get quality applications through, and we minimize the bureaucracy on this as well. So I was quite keen to hear about what support is in place for applicants. So if someone comes forward at the expression of interest stage and is perhaps not sure, is there, you know, can they have a conversation with one of the officers like at that early stage, or what kind of support is in place? So we make sure that people don't put in their volunteer time to apply for something that they may not be eligible or have the structure in place to deliver on.
Yeah, thank you. And we will be deploying resource from the community service to support with some of those expressions of interest.
Thank you, Lucy, then Ros.
Thank you. I think some of my comment has just been answered by the answer to Alex's. So I think that I am very supportive of Claire's suggestion that the cap be raised, because I think that construction costs are so high at the moment that if we don't do that, we will be making it more difficult for a number of schemes to come forward. Things like disability access, actually, you can find that amount wouldn't be enough to cover even some of those kinds of relatively small things because the costs are so high. So I think that's a really sensible suggestion. The other thing that I was going to ask about is whether at that expression of interest point, there would be any support available from the council for organisations who are bidding to think about how they would find match funding if their bid is of a higher level, because I think that actually if we have expertise available to help organisations, if they've got an idea but it's going to be a bit more expensive than we're offering, having support for finding that match funding would be really helpful. So if you've got any thoughts on that, that would be really useful.
Thank you. Yeah, so as part of the process bringing the paper here today, we also consulted with Hunts Forum and CCVS, and we also included Cambridgeshire Acre and Capalc in our conversations. All of those organisations have offered support either to publicise the fund or ongoing support, for example, identifying other pots of funding that are available.
Thank you. So Ros and then Henry.
Yes, so I would agree with sort of raising the limit to £40,000. That seems reasonable, but I do think once we go beyond that, we begin to run into trouble with projects which we've seen last time, and it just became, you know, just impossible to sort of administer, and money getting caught up and not doing anything with. So I think, you know, while big projects can achieve a lot of good, it's really difficult for a council that doesn't have expertise in that to sort of make sure that that money is being used properly, to scrutinise it. It did make me think. So I've tried to contact the Amy Community Fund, which uses county council payments from waste, to understand what their sort of criteria are, or beyond what it says on the website. And it isn't available to everyone in the county, but because it has to be from within a 10-mile as a crow flies radius from a waste site, it is a lot of the county. And I don't know if it's possible to set up a meeting with that fund to talk about it, but it'd be really useful to, you know, have a greater understanding, to be able to work out if they might, you know, respond, look at that fund. Is there anything that could be, you know, what are the aims of it? I know it's community focused, but do they align with the county councils? Can we give feedback from anything we see here? You know, I just think trying to have a conversation with that fund would be helpful, and then possibly helping applicants to this fund apply for that as well. You know, might be, it just feels like, I think, yeah, it feels like a fund that is quite opaque and sort of quite aligned to this fund as well. Certainly for the parish councils and the community councils in my division, they don't necessarily have meetings every month. A decision like applying for this grant couldn't happen without parish council consent. So the lead time needs to be at least 8 weeks and then possibly another 4 weeks before. So, long lead times are really important as far as I'm concerned for community groups to be able to identify whether they have a project which they wish to apply for. And in terms of the money for the county council, it's not just libraries, I think. There's a whole load of schools with empty classrooms, and certainly one in Orchard Park, not in connection with this fund, just generally, local authority school is saying, if we could just get community access to this room, it could be a really good community resource in a place where there are not enough really good community resources. So I think there is opportunity to do something in places where there isn't a great deal of spare space, and there is, and good projects are really needed. I don't really have a question there, I don't think. Maybe about the Amy Fund.
Happy to connect with Amy and find out more about that fund. Yeah.
Henry, you're next, and then Jeff.
Thank you. I don't think I have a question either, but just to throw my weight behind the proposal to increase the amount. I mean, I'm not particularly tied to 40,000 per se. I wouldn't want to upset the Section 151 officer too much, but I mean, if it could be increased to a number that was financially acceptable, I'd say, to, without putting us into too much financial difficulty as a service, I'd be supportive of doing that. I mean, we've heard from various people about costs of construction, and if memory serves, that's why Girton had to pull out, because the construction costs had increased significantly since the money was awarded to them, and they, as a small parish, couldn't pick up the slack, essentially, from. So if we can, anything we can do our end to help try and avoid that at the early stages, and maybe, whilst parishes are going through the application process, maybe some sort of financial advice to them about, potential increases in costs that may not have been foreseen before. So so long story short, I'm supportive of the increase. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. Jeff, you're next.
Yes, Henry's just touched on something I was going to raise as well. It's not just about construction costs. Dealing with small voluntary organisations, and particularly construction projects, but probably any project that is outside their normal activity, tends to be, well, not all cases, but tends to be chaotic. If you're going to do a construction project, you need professional advice, both from architects and a whole range of other people who even look at a small project while it's being constructed. So I think Alex made the point, very important to know exactly what will be allowed in, whether you set the limit at 25 grand or 40,000 or 300,000, even more important, what is allowed in, because there's a whole range of professionals that would need to be contracted in. And frankly, on a £25,000 project, you're probably going to spend a good chunk of money disproportionately. While they all work out what can be done for the money. So, again, this is a question really: what is in the 25,000 or the 40,000? We need some clarity, I think, on that. It may be there. If it's there, I apologise.
Thank you. So the eligibility criteria is set out in 2.11, and that has had input from our colleagues in property. And I think we very much recognise the points that you raise about where there's consultants' fees as well, and planning and larger scale projects, because I think that's the experiences that officers have learned from previous funds. So in 2.11, it talks about in 2.11.4 for the projects to be repairing, maintaining or renewing. And it also outlines about the way that we need the projects to support the visions and ambitions as well. So we feel that that's a clear set of criteria for the fund that are in that section. And again, when we come to application stage and expressions of interest, we will be available to talk to people about those and the project ideas. And that's why we're also proposing that two-stage process, so that by the time people come to full application, those points have been ironed out.
Thank you. Alex, you want to come in?
Yeah, just a small point, because I think when we have the expression of interest and we're offering some support, initial support or advice, I think what's very important as advice as well is like how to actually budget, because I think what happens, it's from my experience working in the voluntary and charitable sector for small organizations, is you see a bid saying you can go max 40K, let's say, and you put the maximum without even thinking about like, I need a contingency budget, I need an inflationary pressure to be added on the budget, or I need some basic kind of budgeting skills on this. And like, I'm not blaming organizations, because mostly it's volunteers applying who don't have the financial training. So I think it's really important to make sure that, if we're applying for like a 40K project, we leave enough money for contingency. And this is something that applicants could receive very early on. And a lot of people actually don't know how to necessarily do that, and would benefit from some support in addition to what I said about, consultants and advice, because then what ends up being is like overspending, and then of course being an issue as well. Thank you.
I think it's important to remember it, and it's set out in section 2 of the report. There will be obviously member input in the second stage, and then that will be reported back to the full committee, as has happened previously. Anybody else at all? David, and then Mark again.
I think the comment you made about the 151 officer is a red herring, because you've only got £1 million to spend. And I can, going back to what Mark said earlier, I see no reason to put a cap on the on each project. You've got that £1 million to spend. Let the project itself be the determining factor, and what that does for the community. Let that be the determining factor. I think that's more important than the money you're talking about.
Okay, thank you very much, David. Mark.
Thank you, Chair. Point I would like to raise is can you make sure in the future paper, which I assume is where it will be, that the criteria for assessing the £500,000 spend projects on council-owned communities have the same scrutiny, and if they're in the same location as a potential non-council build spend, so using my St Neots example, if there's a council building in St Neots that's going to say the library there is going to be upgraded, and or there's a private one, then they are both considered in the same light. I think it would be unfair to have any degree or even perception of preferential treatment to a council one from a public fund as opposed to going onto a private application. So we'd like to see, I mean, it's not in here, so it'll have to come in a future paper, but we'd like to see the criteria for assessment of the council-owned properties spend of this money at the same way as we'd like to see the private ones.
You're right, it will come back to the next meeting, and we're very mindful of that. Mark, thank you for highlighting it. Absolutely. Anybody else? Philippa.
I understand the concerns from colleagues that we need to be sure we get a big bag for our bucks, as it were. I'm quite scared at the prospect of how we score that, but that's not to say we shouldn't. And the absence of whatever this project has to offer, or the distance from any existing one, needs to come in there somewhere, because we are very aware county-wide how some isolated communities do need preferential treatment. And what troubles me is how you weigh that up in terms of numbers. Because you might well say a small community isolated from other offers of services should count highly. And I can see this being really difficult for officers. We hope it becomes self-evident, but I do wonder how one does really weigh that up in the balance.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, you can.
Take your point, Councillor Slatter, but the areas of highest deprivation are in large urban areas. They're not small communities. The areas of highest deprivation are in places like Abbey and Wisbech and places like that. So, I take your point on how you weight them, and it's going to be difficult, but let's not be closed-minded to think that these are just into small communities. Small communities may have more difficulty in raising the resources to apply. I think that's a different matter, but the actual social value of these projects when on completion may be far more beneficial in such places, in urban places, as they would be in a remote village hall. And it's an incredibly difficult subject.
Thank you. So Clara, looks like you've offered an amendment, which I think you have, which I take would be an amendment to paragraph 2.10.3, which is to raise that upper limit from 25,000 to 40,000. Is that correct? Yeah. Sorry, David, you want?
My fault, Chair. I probably should have asked for an amendment against the amendment, because I do feel that my request, not having a limit, and you've only got that £1 million to spend anyway, is a better solution. But I've got nobody here putting the hand up to say that.
Well, there's an amendment to the original recommendation, so I'll look towards Nick for a little bit of advice here. We take the amendment offered by Councillor Daunton first.
No, you need to take the first amendment, which was from Councillor Daunton, Chair.
Okay, we'll take the amendment from Councillor Daunton. Is that seconded? Right, thank you, Jeff. All those in favour of Councillor Daunton's amendment? Yeah. Thank you. And all those against? Sorry, yeah, right. Okay, so the amendment is carried. Do we need to go do anything else there, Nick, with that now becomes a substantive motion, is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
So we've passed the amendment. That is now the substantive motion. So we need to vote on the substantive motion. So all those in favour of that motion?
You're voting on A, B, and C in block.
Yes.
On the recommendations in block.
Correct. But we've amended. Yep. It's just A and B, I'm advised. And we need to do C separately because we need to appoint 7 members to the assessment panel. So that will be slightly separate. If that wasn't clear. So we're voting on A and B. Okay, so the motion is carried as amended. Thank you. So we do need to deal with item C, which is we now subject to recommendation A. We need to appoint 7 members to the assessment panel based on political proportionality. So that would be, what's our figures again? Nick, remind me, please.
That would be 3 Conservative members, 2 Liberal Democrats, 1 Labour and 1 Independent. I think it was proposed that with the steering group that the same members participate on the assessment panel, which was the same cross party.
Okay, thank you. Alex and then Philippa.
Yeah, just to say that if we're taking the recommended members from the previous panel, our Labour representative was Councillor Elisa Machini, and I already spoke to Elisa and I agree that I could self-nominate myself given my membership of this committee as well as my experience in the third sector assessing grants. So then she's happy with that.
Thank you, Alex. Philippa?
Are we limiting our choice to members of this committee? Do we not need to have a wider panel of talents and experience for this sort of thing?
I think we already have a panel, don't we? That's already been set up. And I think because it reports back to this committee, I would suggest it's better that those members from this committee sit on that panel. Ros?
How does the political proportionality work on this committee once now we've got different numbers? Yeah.
Did you want to just clarify, Nick, for us? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I believe if we have 7 members, it's 3 Conservatives, and it will be 3 Liberal Democrats and 1 Labour. No, and no independents.
Okay, so yeah, okay. So it's 3 Conservatives, 3 Liberal Democrats, and 1 Labour member. That's fine. Do we have members here today that would be interested in doing that?
I think you should be on it.
Okay, so who's going to offer me the best deal to join their party to? No, sorry, I jest. That's fine. Okay, I'm happy to be on it. Is that possible, Nick? Yeah. Okay, I'm happy to be on it. I think Alex would like to be there. Anybody else? So we've got Roz, we have Claire, we have Adela, we have Henry.
Sorry, Chair, if I may, Councillor Criswell nominated Councillor on behalf of the Conservatives, he nominated himself, Councillor French and Councillor Costello.
That's fine, that's great. Does that complete our set? Is that all 7? Yeah, it does. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Right, so we voted on all the recommendations, and then we'll move on to item 7, which is the agenda plan, appointments to outside bodies, internal advisory groups and panels, and member champions. Could you, Nick, please just detail the appointments to be made by the committee? Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. The appointments are all in the appendices on this item in the agenda. There's outside body appointments, and with those and the internal advisory groups, it's proposed that the previous representatives are reappointed, except for a couple of exceptions. And on the outside bodies, this would be for Councillor Ambrose Smith to replace Councillor Whelan on the East Cambridgeshire Community Safety Partnership. And there's a new group, the Cambridge City and South Cambridgeshire Gypsy Roma Traveller Accommodation Member Reference Group. And it's proposed that Councillor Bradnam and Councillor Mandy Smith be appointed to that. And then on the internal advisory groups, just to clarify that the published version mistakenly put that Councillor Daunton was the White Ribbon Delivery Group rep, and it's actually Councillor Shaler. So it would be to reappoint Councillor Shaler. And also on the County Advisory Group on Archives and Local Studies, it's proposed for Councillor Daunton to take up what's down as a vacancy on that board group.
Is that? Yeah, I have that. Am I replacing Councillor Cox-Condren? Or is Councillor Bulat replacing Councillor Cox-Condren?
Councillor Bulat actually did replace Councillor Cox-Condren at the last meeting. The committee appointed her, so you'd be replacing Councillor Bulat.
Thank you. Yes, I'm happy to do that.
Lucy, yeah.
Can I just ask about the Community Safety Partnership and the change from Councillor Whelan to Councillor Ambrose Smith? Is that has that been requested by both of them, or?
Yeah, that was requested by Councillor Whelan because she's already on the Safety Partnership.
In that case, that
another
makes
capacity.
absolute sense. I just wanted to know. Thank you very much.
Any other questions on this at all, or comments?
Yes, besides those outside body and internal groups, there are 2 member champion appointments, which is the migrant champion and the community safety champion, which the previous one was Councillor Bulat as of recently, and previously before that it was Councillor Cox-Condren as the community safety champion. And so there's a vacancy there.
Hear that properly?
Community safety champion. Was that something you're interested in?
Yes, I've
yeah,
already
it was.
said so and
Yeah,
sought
so
advice.
you're happy to go on that?
Yes, please.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay, that's great, thank you. Right, is that it, Nick? We've done those, brilliant, excellent. Any comments or questions before we finish the meeting? No, okay, well, thank you very much for your time. 58 minutes, a new record. We're due to meet next on the 6th of July. So thank you for your attendance and have a safe journey home. Take care, bye.